Okay, let's set the scene. It's June 4th, 1942. Out there in the immense darkness of the Pacific Ocean, the most powerful naval force the world has ever seen is steaming towards its destiny. This is the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet, and for 6 straight months, they have known nothing but total, crushing victory. I mean, think about it. Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Singapore. They'd built an empire on a foundation of absolute, battle-hardened confidence. So, on the bridge of their flagship carrier, the Akagi, they know, they're about to deliver the final, killing blow to American power in the Pacific. In their minds, they are simply invincible.
So that brings us right to the heart of it all, doesn't it? How do you even begin to fight an enemy like that? An enemy whose confidence is unshakable, whose experience is unmatched, and whose power just seems overwhelming. You know, this isn't just a battle we're talking about. It's a puzzle, a high-stakes, life-or-death puzzle. And the answer, well, it's an absolute masterclass in strategy, deception, and just sheer grit. So, let's unravel that blueprint together.
I mean, just look at these numbers. Seriously, the raw math of this situation is just staggering. The Japanese, under the legendary Admiral Yamamoto, brought 8 aircraft carriers to America's 3, 11 battleships to America's 0. Why 0? Because America's battle line was still sitting at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. We're talking over 200 vessels in this massive, complex plan against a tiny American task force of maybe 26 ships. The only place the numbers are even in the same ballpark is carrier aircraft. On paper, this isn't a fair fight. It's an execution. This is the very definition of David versus Goliath, and believe me, the Japanese knew it.
You see, every great military plan is built on a foundation of assumptions. But for the Japanese, their assumptions weren't just part of the plan, they were woven into the very fabric of their naval doctrine. And they were fatal. First, they were absolutely convinced that the American carriers were thousands of miles away down in the South Pacific. They knew the carrier USS Yorktown was badly damaged, and their experts calculated it would take at least 3 months to repair. They also held this deep-seated belief that American pilots were just inexperienced and that their planes were obsolete. But the biggest assumption, the one that everything, and I mean everything, depended on, was that their complete radio silence meant their plan was a total, impenetrable secret. The scale of this assumption is just hard to wrap your head around. This entire operation, with more than 200 ships moving across millions of square miles of ocean, was built on the idea of total surprise. Every single officer, from Admiral Yamamoto at the top all the way down to the pilots on the flight decks, truly believed they were sailing into an ambush of their own making, that the Americans would have no clue what was about to hit them. Their confidence was absolute. And this is where the entire story just pivots on a dime. Because while that massive Japanese fleet sailed in perfect, confident silence, somebody else was listening. The greatest weapon in this battle wasn't going to be a battleship or an aircraft carrier. It was information. The Japanese plan had a fatal flaw, and it was about to be ruthlessly exploited by a small group of people working in a basement thousands of miles away. So let's meet the unlikely heroes of Midway. This is Station Hypo. It's not a fleet, not an army, but a cramped, stiflingly hot basement in Pearl Harbor, a world away from the polished halls of power in Washington. This is where Commander Joseph Rochefort and his brilliant team of cryptanalysts fought a totally different kind of war. They worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and sheer determination, trying to crack the Japanese naval code, JN-25B. And by May of 1942, they weren't reading everything, but they were reading just enough to see the shadows of a massive operation taking shape. So here's the crucial part. How did they go from just a suspicion to a dead certainty? Well, Rochefort's team kept seeing this code designator AF popping up in messages about the big attack. They had a really strong hunch that AF was Midway Island, but Admiral Nimitz, he needed proof, so they came up with this beautifully simple piece of counterespionage. They had the base at Midway send out an unencrypted radio message, in plain English, for anyone to hear complaining that their freshwater distillation plant was broken. It was the perfect bait. And sure enough, just days later, Station Hypo intercepted a Japanese intelligence report stating that AF is short on water. Boom, they had him.
The sheer scale of what they achieved is just perfectly captured in this quote from Nimitz's top intelligence officer Edwin Layton. Think about this. This wasn't just about knowing the target anymore. Thanks to Station Hypo, the Americans knew the entire Japanese order of battle, the exact date of the attack, and the precise routes the Japanese carriers would take to get there. Nimitz knew exactly where to put his much smaller fleet to lie in wait. The battle was already being won before a single shot was ever fired.
And this incredible intelligence advantage was made even bigger by another one of those fatal Japanese assumptions. See, they were right that the USS Yorktown was heavily damaged. Their mistake was underestimating American resolve. Japanese intelligence said 3 months for repairs. But at Pearl Harbor, 1,400 workers swarmed that ship and labored around the clock. They didn't just repair the Yorktown, they basically resurrected it. In 72 hours, 3 days, they did what was supposed to be impossible. This ghost ship, which the Japanese were absolutely certain was out of the fight, was about to play a decisive role.
Okay, so now we come to the day itself, and a series of decisions that would seal Japan's fate. At 7:15 in the morning, after his first attack on Midway Island, the Japanese commander, Admiral Nimitz, makes a fateful call. Believing no American ships are anywhere nearby, he orders his reserve planes, which are armed with torpedoes for ship attacks, to be rearmed with bombs for a second strike on the island. This creates absolute chaos on the hangar decks. Then, just 13 minutes later, a scout plane spots American ships. Panic. Nimitz reverses his order, demanding the planes be rearmed again with torpedoes. Then, at 9:20, the first American attacks begin, and the consequences of all this indecision become tragically clear.
The first Americans to actually find the Japanese fleet were the torpedo squadrons, and their plane, the TBD Devastator, was tragically slow and obsolete. I mean, to launch their torpedoes, they had to fly straight and level at just 120 knots, making them the easiest targets imaginable for the lightning-fast Japanese Zero fighters, which could fly at over 330 knots. Their attacks were incredibly brave, but they were utterly suicidal. This harrowing account from Ensign George Gay, who was the sole survivor of his entire squadron, it just says everything. He watched from the water as his friends were shot out of the sky one by one. Of the 41 American torpedo bombers that attacked that morning, 35 were destroyed, and not a single one of their torpedoes hit a Japanese carrier. From the Japanese perspective on their ships, these attacks just confirmed everything they believed about American incompetence. But those men did not die in vain. Their sacrifice, which seemed so completely futile, had an unintended and an absolutely decisive consequence. The time is 10:22 a.m. This right here, this is the moment the entire Pacific War pivots, because in shooting down all those slow, low-flying torpedo planes, something critical and unforeseen happened. Every single Japanese Zero fighter, their entire combat air patrol, had been pulled down to sea level to slaughter those torpedo bombers, which meant, at that exact moment, the skies directly above the Japanese fleet were empty. The carriers were completely vulnerable, their flight decks packed with planes, exposed fuel lines, and the very bombs and torpedoes that had been so chaotically shuffled just an hour before. At that moment, the Japanese fleet had sealed its own doom. And arriving at that precise moment of vulnerability, through a combination of skill, sheer luck, and dogged determination, were the American dive bombers from the carriers Enterprise and Yorktown. And what happened next wasn't really a battle, it was an annihilation. In just 6 minutes, less time than it takes to make a cup of coffee, the fate of the war was sealed. A single bomb hit the flagship Akagi, went through the flight deck and exploded in the hangar below, which was full of bombs and fuel, starting a catastrophic chain reaction. The carrier Kaga took 4 direct hits. The Soryu took 3. In a matter of minutes, the absolute pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were turned into floating infernos. The myth of Japanese invincibility was vaporized in the heat of their own burning ships. Now, losing 4 of their best carriers in a single day was a disaster. But the real story of why Midway was so decisive lies right here, on the factory floor. From this day until the end of the war, Japan only managed to build 12 more carriers. In that same period, the United States produced 141. The losses at Midway weren't just tactical, they were utterly, completely irreplaceable for Japan. And it wasn't just ships. Japan lost its best, its most experienced veteran pilots. These were men with thousands of flight hours under their belts. Japan's pre-war training program produced only about 100 pilots a year. The U.S. was already training 2,500 a month. By 1944, the gap was just insurmountable. Japan was sending up rookie pilots with 150 hours of experience against American pilots who had over 600. It wasn't a fair fight anymore. It was a slaughter. So when we step back and look at the complete blueprint for this impossible victory, we see it wasn't just one thing. It was a complete systemic failure on one side and a systemic advantage on the other. Where Japan assumed secrecy, America had intelligence. Where Japan had limited production, America had overwhelming industrial might. America had shipboard radar, Japan was still relying on the naked eye. In every single crucial, unseen category that really matters in modern warfare, America held the winning hand. And in the end, it all comes back to this. The man who engineered the entire victory, Admiral Nimitz, he summed it up perfectly. The courage of the American pilots was astounding. The industrial power was absolutely essential. But the foundation of it all, the catalyst for the entire impossible victory, was intelligence. Knowing what your enemy is going to do before they do it is the ultimate advantage.
The story of Midway is so much more than just a famous battle. It's a timeless, powerful lesson about the incredible danger of overconfidence. The Japanese Navy in 1942 was arguably the best in the world, but their unwavering belief in their own invincibility blinded them to the threats they couldn't see. Hubris, that toxic blend of arrogance and pride, was their deadliest enemy. So it kind of leaves us with a question to reflect on, right? What are our own blind spots? What critical assumptions are shaping our own plans in our lives or our work? What blueprint is guiding you today?